Welcome to the Learn, Grow, Teach, Parent podcast. All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today in the studio, I have Mr. Andrew Disney. He's an old friend of mine. We've known each other for a very long time. He has a fascinating life, and his dedication to education is absolutely stunning. He's really one of the innovative type of teachers that this podcast is dedicated to, and he is an excellent man as well. Welcome to the podcast, Andy. How you doing?
Doing great. Thank you, Mark. It's great seeing you.
Great seeing you too. Hey, if you have a moment, let's tell our listeners a little bit about your story, like how you got, where you're at now and how you got to your current status.
Sure. I'm currently working at Winter Park High School in Winter Park, Florida, in Orlando, Eastern Orlando. Winter Park is Orange County is the 8th largest school district in the country. And Winter Park High School is arguably the premier public high school in the state of Florida. I could make that argument with anyone. We have about 3,500 students. We administer approximately 3,000 AP tests a year. We have 120 IB diploma graduates. Athletically, the arts are, we just do amazing things there. And I'm really pleased to be part of that educational community.
Let me ask you a question. I mean, you are in the thick of things right now. This is the launch pad from which young minds are getting either into a career, into college, and it sounds like you're handling a very, very large group of students. Do you find that the process of helping kids develop through these years, has it become something different than it was, that not just what you remember, but is it different than how it's been in even the recent past?
Yeah, I think it's certainly different from the time you and I went through school, significantly. We're Orange County, as large as it is, we are a one-to-one device district, which is an amazing accomplishment in and of itself. And that started in 2015. But yeah, we have a wall of scholars at Winter Park High School, and you walk by and you see those former students' pictures and the universities that they are attending now. It's staggering. But I think that footprint of preparation, that unique educational footprint that they're developing, really starts now in the middle school. You're starting to earn high school credit in middle schools. You're starting to earn college credit at the 9th grade level. You're starting to develop that overall academic resume that allows you access into some of these elite institutions. I think it has certainly changed. It is much more diligent. It is much more focused. And I think similarly for those students that we're preparing to go into vocational fields and to go into trade schools and those sort of things. I think that preparation is always there. And I think the other thing we're doing better at is giving our students options or various paths they can take to ensure success. And success doesn't always mean going to a 4-year institution. Success, from my perspective, is an individual who finds their purpose and is contributing to his or her community.
That's a great point. I mean, I can see that if that's your focus, then you are 100% going to attack the problem from a different angle. You're going to look at the whole person. You're going to look at the child. The child is going to be better suited for the world if the end state goal is to create a better, purposeful life for them. You have a very unique philosophy. But let me ask you, let's backtrack a little bit. How did you get into education? What's your story? Where did you start out and how did you get into it?
Growing up in Miami, Florida, youngest of 4, a real strong nuclear family, very supportive. And being the youngest child, I think impacts one's matriculation through childhood, for better or for worse. But I was reminded last night. I'm at my parents' house today. I attended kindergarten for 4 years. My grandmother was one of my teachers. My mom was one of my teachers. I think education, the way my parents raised us, I think education's always been not only emphasized but practiced on a regular basis. No one in my family graduated from college before I did, ironically.
Mm.
But that was kind of always the goal, I think, to get to that point. My family has always been upstanding members of the community and stalwarts of the greater good. And so I think some of those things, although in my youth I kind of rebelled against some of those things, I think you go back to what it says in Proverbs: train them the way to go when you're young, and when they're adults, they return to it.
Yeah, there's real wisdom to that. And I had the pleasure of knowing you when you were younger, and I can attest to the strength of your family, the conviction that both your parents had. I mean, definitely having that guidance gave you a sort of a foundational support that you could lean back on in tough times. So I can remember you are an exceptionally mentally tough person. And a lot of your life, you have the ability to calmly and coolly take controversy for what it was, and simply do what you needed to do to get beyond that. I don't think you had that to the same level in your 40s than you did when we were kids. I do think that something affected you along that way. What happened in your life that gave you such strength, such fortitude?
I think my varied experiences have certainly brought on a different perspective, a broader perspective. I think going off to college in the Midwest, going all the way to South Dakota to play football and experience college on my own was a tremendous growing experience. I worked at several different colleges and universities in the Midwest as a football coach. I think all of those things certainly contributed to a more worldly view, and certainly independence. And then, I moved to Japan in 1990, and I spent 6 years there. And I think the isolation was difficult, being away from English-speaking people, being away from a Western culture. But I think it was incredibly a time of growth as well, and a time to see America from a distance, to live that experience as a minority in a really homogenous society. I think all of those things really allow me, the quintessential white man, to come back to America with a sense that there. I understand the plight. I understand the struggles of assimilating into a different culture, and I learned
This
a
is
culture.
right. Exactly. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but let me back up a second, because you're underplaying this a little bit. The Japanese are very isolated, and this is even today still very isolated. To be accepted into Japanese culture is in and of itself a major accomplishment. I mean, they have a word for foreigners, gaijin, isn't that the word that gaijin? And that, they're talking about xenophobia. They're respectful, but
Right.
you gotta do a lot of things to crack in. How difficult was it for you to learn the language, learn the culture, and then learn and earn the respect of these people?
Well, you talk about learning the language and learning the culture. Certainly, I have a long way to go, but I was able to. I was able to quickly adapt through great instruction from the team that brought me to Japan. The people around me, I still have great friends there. In fact, I am planning my return to Japan in 2025 to reunite. It'll be 35 years since I first went to Japan. Yeah, I mean, I think with any growth, there's going to be immense failures, and I had my share of failures. There's going to be immense challenges, and there's got to be a sense of um, you got to have help to get through that. And I think I had amazing help. But the Japanese culture is extremely rich. It is extremely rigid. It is extremely gratifying to be part of it and to kind of be on the inside of it. But yeah, and I wouldn't change that experience for the world, really. But I was never really in the inner circle, as it were. I felt more at times like a prop. The blonde hair, the blue eyes, the posture of an American football coach. I fit it. I was their Rudy, and so um, it was a great experience, and there was a lot of love, and the Japanese express affection differently than we do. The Japanese don't have our Puritan values like we do in America. It's just a whole different mindset, and I had to be open to learning that mindset and that approach to problem solving, that approach to management, the approach to interpersonal relationships. In fact, I'm using my hands right now talking, Mark, as I'm talking to you, and I would never do that in Japan because that would be offensive.
Unbelievable that you went as a teacher, you were hired in to come in as a teacher, essentially. You're teaching them. But immediately you also take on the role of being a student because you're learning all these difficult things, the culture, the language, the ability to communicate. And I often tell all the kids that I work with, and especially my children, I've always told them that in your life, you need to be a master at something that you dedicated a lot of time and energy to, that you're definitely an expert and you're good at it. You need to be something that you are learning, you're not quite mastering, and where you have competition that drives you to become better. And then you also have to be willing to be a newbie at stuff and to fail and fall flat on your face and be horrible at it. And if you can successfully fill these roles as you go on in life, then you become more and more comfortable with both failure and success. You see them differently. It doesn't go to your head. And that's really something about you, Andy, is that you have accomplished a lot, but it doesn't go to your head because your heart is enormous. You really want to help these kids, don't you? I mean, you really want to help make
Yeah,
better people, don't you?
it, it's my, it is my mission. I mean, things changed, 2001, 9/11 to me changed everything. I was living in Tokyo at the time. I just could not believe in the 20th century that we would have such inability to have civil dialogue and to be able to talk through things. It still irks me that life goes on. Um, Meanwhile, somewhere on the globe, we have two countries at war right now, and there's a loss of life on a daily basis. And it just seems to be ridiculous in many ways. So, um, the pen is mightier than the sword. I believe that, and I believe words are stronger than any sort of weaponry. So I'm a person who believes in language. I'm a person who believes in culture. I'm a person who believes in uh, equality for all. And until we get to that point, I'm going to continue on my mission. And so what I really do at Winter Park High School more than anything is I focus on the skills of literacy. I want I I really feel like a lot of the issues we have today is because of our reliance on uh, sound bites, on videos, on someone else's perspective who is telling us how to feel about a situation instead of looking at source documents, looking at what has actually happened, being able to discern uh, facts versus someone else's reality.
Yeah, this is a great point. I mean, I was talking to someone just the other day, and it's important to teach children how to think critically. Obviously, you want them to be able to come to their own thoughts about things. But there's a danger if there isn't a foundation there, a morality that drives them, because suddenly what you have is, I think you have a little bit of the confusion of what's going on today, which is it's easier to shut down a conversation than it is to have one. And disagreeing with people is not an invalidation of yourself. It's merely an opportunity to open up and learn more. So I can see where your approach through literature and through the understanding of other people's words does a better job of helping young people navigate how to find their own voice, how to find their own words. It's a difficult, difficult thing. I mean, you talked about the success that your school has with academics. Do you find that the student population at the school has to grow into that? Or do they come to you fully formed because of your own reputation and now the community? Has it spread out to the community, the kids you get? Are they better quality kids than you expect?
I think it's a combination of both. I think culture in an educational setting is so important, and culture is something that is really developed over time. And it's not something that you can go to a workshop and say, we're going to implement this culture now at our school. We have that kind of that daily climate, but the culture overall is something that is a legacy that kind of propels us to move forward in a particular direction. But, we have, we have a large percentage, almost 50% of our population is free and reduced lunch. So we do have those students who are social economically struggling, but they come into an academic setting where the expectations have been established and they have been maintained for years. And I think that motivates those students who are not necessarily speaking that academic language at home or don't have the siblings to follow that path for. They're the trailblazers. And those are the kids who have different strengths and they have different abilities. The challenge is to get them to make it through the path that has been set for them. And there are multiple paths, and we have so many unique and noble programs to allow them to find their niche. You talked about young people trying to find their place in life, and I think high school is an amazing time for students to try different things, to find out what their passion is, where their strengths lie, where they can really apply themselves. I liked. I'm working with 6 different classes right now, and they're all ELA classes. But when I talk to them, I tell them that this is a thinking class, this is a reading class, this is a writing class, this is a communication class, and we have got to master those tools of communication. We have to be experts at decoding the text, the encrypted text, and then we have to encode it in order to organize our own thoughts and be able to know how to reflect on that information and respond to it.
That's a really great curriculum. It's not normal. You see a lot of, I would say, public schools where the issues don't get the teacher to that point where they can really do this in the classroom. There's a lot of external pressures that come with that. And there's a lot of pressure for the kids as well. I mean, I find that many students that I talk to they have trouble dealing with stress. Stress I happen to believe that stress is a good thing. It forces you to be creative. It also lets you understand that you have an obstacle. And then now the real lesson is, how do you go through that obstacle? How do you work past it? Because in that comes all the good things in life that people want. But there's a series of busy work that confuses the issue, because you and I are talking about deep subjects now. But when the nitty gritty of how to get through school, I find there's a lot of homework that is unnecessary. I find there's a lot of busy work. How do you personally combat that and bring the good golden juice that you want them to drink immediately and sustain that in the classroom?
Well, I'll tell you right off, I don't assign homework as a teacher. There is no homework. I'm realistic about that. I would encourage them to read. They certainly rereading rich literature rewards the reader, but or read something of their choice. I'm a strong proponent of that, but I don't enforce that in any way. Um, we've been in Orange County. We've had 7 days of school, and I can tell you my initial curriculum. Day one, we're going to go over the syllabus. We're going to talk about behavior expectations. We're going to talk about roads to success. Day two, we did some digital citizenship thing. Day three, we looked at language, at really the foundations of language from the ninth grade standpoint, which is what are the parts of speech? What are the types of sentences? How do we classify sentences? What is the syntax? Um, you know, I believe in the science of reading as well. I don't believe in whole reading or that whole reading approach that if we just throw it at them, something's going to stick. I really believe in breaking it down to its smallest units. And then we got into, the ninth grade class. We read Judith Ortiz Cofer, and it was a story about a 16-year-old boy who just got out of juvie and is struggling with his relationship with his father. And that story, when we got through analyzing it for meanings of layer and literary elements and those sort of things, I gave them one question. And the question was this: does a young person deserve a chance at redemption? And I gave them 15 minutes to think and write. And so we want to learn about the human condition. And we want our kids to think deeper about that human condition and learn from the literature so that they have the emotional intelligence to go out into the world and deal with hardships, to deal with uh, difficulties. But what they learn from that story is that everyone has a backstory. Everyone has a reason why some of those behaviors are the way they are today. And I think that's such an important question to get to a student. What's your story? Where are you coming from?
Absolutely. I mean, what you're telling me, you're a week into school and you've already cracked their heads open and poured into that morality, tolerance, a deeper pursuit of a deeper meaning. All of that happened right there, right in the beginning, and the learning. I mean, it's a gold standard. It really is. I take my hat off to you because in my teaching, when I teach English to kids, and I've taught from young to eighth grade primarily. The high schoolers are not. I don't get there to that ninth grade level, but I always begin with classics, and I'm a fan of classical literature and a classical education. The way I look at it is when a new student, is being exposed to something. There's some Greek, there's some Roman, there's someone in antiquity that struggled with that for the first time.
Hmm.
And I like to introduce a lot of it through that type of storytelling. And then that type of reading can hold on to, they can hold on to the original story of this Greek and say, well, I'm going to get through it. I guess to me, getting past the difficult parts is where the learning happens.
Hmm.
How do you do that so successfully?
I think first of all, I have goals that I want to get my kids to, and I want to work with them where they are and get them to that goal. That goal of a growth mindset, that growth of the importance of language as that conduit to our culture, the goal of being being able to communicate in many different forms and be able to communicate thoroughly. The 10th grade group I'm working with right now, we read a chapter out of Persepolis to start the year, a graphic novel, 1980 Iran. And we really got into that generational gap, that kind of that universal theme that teenagers and adults don't always see eye to eye, and there's not that open channel of communication, and that we need to be sensitive to that and understand the changes that are going on, um, and dealing with the backdrop of war, and how that coming of age of an individual, and so I think more self-awareness is critical for students to be conscious of, those self-management skills. Kind of, we used to refer to these as soft skills, but these are integral skills. These are skills that allow them to really have that self-discipline to say, the learning goal is set here. How do I get to that point? And my path might be very different than everyone else's, and that's okay. Um, I'm a firm believer in paper and pencil. I don't believe that we have the same connection with the keyboard and the screen. And I think when we scratch out words and we write a different word and we put an arrow and insert it somewhere else, and we work through that drafting process of writing and organizing our thoughts, I think it's so rewarding and so uh, enriching for the student. And but again, everyone is taking kind of their own path, their own course. And I learned very quickly in watching students how I need to approach that student and what I need to connect to for a background of that student. One of the first things I do with students is try to get some idea of where they came from, where they want to go, and be able to advise them from there.
I mean, you sound almost like a mentor. You sound like you're modeling so much. There's a thoughtfulness that goes into what your actions are going to do. Obviously, that end state thinking allows you to visualize exactly what you would like to, uh, I don't know, draw out of these different kids. I mean, you sound like a very different teacher than a modern teacher.
Hmm.
You sound like, I mean, is that a compliment? I think it's a compliment.
Yeah,
You sound,
I can tell you this. I had tremendous teachers growing up. I had tremendous parents growing up. I had neighbors who were mentoring. I had football coaches who mentored me throughout. Joe Barantovich is a great example of that. He gave me my first job in teaching. He called me when I wasn't sure what I was doing in life, and he said he was at Miami Southridge at the time, and he said, "Hey, I have an English position open. You interested in it? 6 months." Out of the blue, changed my life forever. And it put me in an arena that I thought, this is where I'm meant to be. This is what I want to do. Um, but yeah, I think the coaching background, the athletic background, strong family background, I think all of those things contribute to what I do today and who I am today.
well, it's a good contribution. You and I went different ways. You're now in the high school level. I'm in early childhood. I mean, I very, very much, my education now is all with kindergartners, pre-K, even first and second graders. That's what happens. And look at us, two old guys
Yeah.
doing this type of work. I don't think there's enough men who are teaching in the world, or in the United States, definitely. Do you agree?
Without question. I think when I look at our district, kind of that mid-management leadership team, it is predominantly females. When I go to a literacy leads meeting for Orange County, oftentimes I'm one of two, maybe the only male in a room of 40, 50 educators. And it's disappointing to me in for my gender. It's disappointing to me for the kids because I can see the difference it makes in a classroom. And I'm not saying it should be all male teachers by any means, but there needs to be that male presence. There needs to be that male influence. Needs to be that male perspective. I am unapologetically heterosexual, but I don't care about what my kids are doing or what they can, where they're going. That's their, we basically stay in public education. We stay out of politics, sex, and religion. That's not our bailiwick. And I encourage students to explore and to experience and to learn as much as they can. And perhaps we should teach those things. But at this point, I think it's best that the public, in this climate we're in right now, it's best we stay out of it. But to simply grow as an individual, to simply be aware of who you are, to your value in life, and your contribution to your community. Uh, I wrote a personal mission statement years ago, and it just deals with being a positive member of our community. And here's my philosophy: 7 billion people in the world. There's more good people by far than there are bad. And
That's a true statement. I mean, getting back to the male teachers, there is a missing male perspective, and that's not saying anything about the wonderful women who are teachers. That's not saying anything about anything other than the fact that I do believe personally, teaching for me has been fulfilling. It has softened me. It has given me the ability to understand the world from a completely different perspective than being a parent. Because being a parent is partially being a teacher. But I don't really believe that you need parents in the classroom, not that role. What you really need is a good teacher and a good mentor. And I think young men are falling behind. They're not as anxious to go into college. And I remember a time when you didn't need to go to college to become a teacher, and teachers were wonderful, and there were a lot of male teachers. Andy, did you go to Glades Junior High School?
no, I
as
went to
well?
Riviera.
You went to Riviera, so we didn't meet till we went to Southwest High School. But I can remember going to junior high school in the 70s and having an equal amount of male and female teachers. I can remember at Southwest when we were in high school, an equal amount of male and female teachers. But I now go into these schools where I'm teaching, and I go to various schools throughout Miami-Dade County, and it is extremely rare to find a man in any one of these classrooms. And I, for one, would like to change that in a way that's part of the reason why the podcast is what it is, but mostly because I feel that guys like you and I, we get a bad rap in the general sense based on our gender. But in reality, the fact that we both had excellent family models and then in turn created excellent families ourselves, I think we have something to say. We shouldn't be quiet about it.
Right.
And it's not about hearkening back to the old days.
Well, in Mark, in early America, the teachers were basically the old maids. They were the women who were not married, who became teachers for their life, and that's what they did. And I think that legacy continues today with how teachers are being paid. We're not paid as professionals. We are paid it's a supplementary income designed to have a breadwinner at home and then a teacher, and then you can make it through. Only by the grace of God have I made it through to this point in my life. But I don't see a foreseeable end to my career. I think it's going to go as long as I can go. And honestly, I don't want it to end at this point anytime soon. But you're absolutely right. When we look at those headline makers of disgruntled youth, they're primarily males. They're that left out. They're those ones in the middle that no one's really paying attention to, that no one has a connection to. And every child, particularly in the high school level, they need an adult who advocates for their future. They need someone who's personally connected with them. I floated the idea at my high school of making trading cards, as ridiculous as it sounds. But I want a card for each child. And I want each teacher, each staff member to have a group of these cards of kids that they care about individually and they talk to personally on a regular basis of what are your challenges, what are your successes, where do you see yourself going, what's the roadblocks, how can I help?
That's amazing. Let me riff on that for a second. The idea of a one-on-one education is really where I'm at. I feel it's the most successful form of education, a tutor and a student. And that one-on-one education, just you can't do it when you're teaching one to many. It doesn't fit the formula, which is why parents' involvement in education has become so important, especially in the modern age, where they have to pick up that slack and become these tutors. Not parents, they're not, they don't, no one says that to them. No one says, oh, you're going to have kids, you're going to put your kids in school, and then you're going to become a supplementary tutor for that child for the rest of their lives.
Right.
That's just, it's not in the manual, it's not in the handbook. Where in reality, I think that what you're doing, your suggestion of bringing back that sense of urgency to that one-on-oneness, is kids respond to that. I don't care what age you are. I don't care what type of child you are. If someone pays attention to you as an individual, then you learn, oh, my individualness is important. And then you get away from groups and identities that choose to put you into a box. Because it's the kids that are not in a box that move on to that purposeful life you were talking about earlier.
But
Can you
go ahead.
go ahead? No, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to give you an example of that. I've been reading student writing over the weekend. These kids want to know how I feel about their writing. They want feedback, and that's what I'm going to give them. Everyone who wrote something gets the same amount of points. I don't really care. It's not the points that I'm after. What I'm after is I want that student to know that I care about their writing. I care about their thinking. I care about their approach to academics, to life itself. And I want them to be able to frame those things in a way that is appropriate. So all I'm doing is giving them comments and feedback and saying, yes, you did this assignment. Great job. But here's things we have to work on. Or here's some things I would change to make it better. Your choice.
Do they continue to write? Do they like writing? Do your students enjoy writing?
We're in day 7 right now, kind of a new group of kids. I think they're going to enjoy it. I think they're going to find that the things we talk about apply to their lives or future lives. So I think it is. I think it adds value to their lives, and I think there's some real world application to it. Absolutely. We talk about writing letters. We talk about journaling. We talk about, how do we go about doing these things? Why would I do these things?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, think about most people do not think clearly. And part of that is because most of your thinking is done when you're talking. And that's one type of thinking, but that's not really enough. You have to be able to write to think. And you have to have a relationship with your writing to therefore give those words meaning. And then you have to have a desire to write, to explore it further so that meaning then has value to you. Because something can mean something to you and be completely invaluable to you. But making those 3 connections is a process. And I don't think, I'll give you an example, a better example through reading. I'm not a big fan of teaching very, very young children to decode letters and read. I think it's confusing for them, and they eventually will catch up. But I do think they need to love storytelling. So with the very, very young group that I was teaching, I would always tell stories. I would tell them the story, engage them in such a way that the story became meaningful. And then that encouragement over the years sprouted and became, well, I like stories. I really love listening to stories. Let me take a shot at this reading thing. And suddenly they became readers, but it was through the love of storytelling, right? Understanding that. I think that happens with writing as well. There's a pathway to take it through there. Do you agree?
Without question. And I feel like I am the one who needs to provide them the tools, the framework in which to effectively communicate those things in the written word. I have learned so much about kind of the etymology of words, and I love that part of teaching new words or the morphology of words, how we change words with affixes and so on. I'm a huge fan of being able to take an adjective and use it as a different part of speech, to utilize participial phrases effectively to describe something that is going on. And some of our kids do this naturally. And I think it's probably because they were read to, because they do have an affinity for the stories. They do have a familiarity with the art of writing, and so I had several first drafts that I read this weekend that I just said, excellent, keep writing, write on. And some who I just say, look, mechanically you're weak in this area. We need to shore this up, and that's okay. The other point I wanted to make about education, Mark, and we don't talk about this enough, is education is emotive. It's visceral. It there's more to it than just the intellect. There's that emotional connection that we're making, that emotional investment. And, teachers after the hardest days will sometimes sit in a room just smiling, a quiet room. We did it. It was a struggle, but we made it through. Or conversely, there's times teachers will sit in their rooms and simply cry.
Because it was so emotive, or
Well,
the difficulty, or was it just to
yeah,
bring out something positive?
perhaps we learned about the struggle of an individual kid, or perhaps a child had this epiphany, this awareness for that you've been struggling to get to, but you see
Yes.
that in a child, and you're always going to have that connection. And I always leave my students at the end of the year. I am always your teacher. We will always have had this experience, but this particular group we will never have that dynamic again as a class. We'll never be able to replicate this. So we never know in life when we're going to have those moments.
Yeah, I'm struck by just how much you drew from your life in sports, your coaching, and you've brought it into the classroom in a sensitive and mindful way. It's unbelievable to me. It's so encouraging and so beautiful, because what you're telling me is that you care.
Hmm.
It's the exact opposite of what the reputation of modern education is: that detachment, that intellect, that teaching to the test mentality, that so much. And it's just not present in our conversation. And it really, to be honest with you, it's not present in many of the teachers that I know. So why do you think the reputation is such?
I think there seems to be this thought out there that teachers simply want to work a minimum amount of time, have summers off, do their own thing. It's this bohemian lifestyle that they're not grounded individuals. I I don't want to speculate into conspiracy theories, but there seems to be an outright they abhor public education for whatever reason. We're pushing vouchers, we're pushing charter schools, we're pushing a lack of oversight, instead of encouraging, like we do with students, more independence, more thought provoking. I told you we weren't going to talk about politics, but right now we have an inverted balance of politicians telling educators what to do. Politicians need to learn from educators. It's completely backwards at this point. We should be our policies should be developed at our great universities, those think tanks we have for the future, and we need to vet those ideas, and we need to put them into practice. But there seems to be this distrust for what is taking place. I have never heard of I have never personally, in my 21 years as a public school educator, witnessed a professional indoctrinating a student into some religious, political, or sexual orientation manner in any way. Now, do we read stories that might include some of these controversial topics, without question. You can't get through Animal Farm. You can't read Brave New World without invoking some of these ideas. So, you know, let's let our kids be thinkers. Let's let them work things out. Let's let them struggle with it and find what they feel is the best way through. But we can't do that without just allowing them to experience the world and these ideas uh, individually in a
Yeah,
supportive environment.
absolutely. You make a couple of excellent points here. There's too many cooks
Hmm.
spoiling the broth. There's too many ideas being thrown in, and there really isn't enough independence sent to the educators. And I go back to, if we're going to reimagine a better educational system, we have to reimagine it by filling it with new people that have new ideas, with a balance of outside influences. And I do believe in experimentation. I think the only way that you can say this modality works or this one doesn't is unless you have sort of a friendly competition between philosophical educational ideals. There's
Hmm.
no such thing as one size fits all. There's just no way that you can have one way of determining whether this is the best way to teach kids. I like a deconstructed method
Hmm.
where there's a lot of small schools with a lot of highly motivated individuals, well trained in the art of teaching a whole person, and not just someone who's cashing a check. I mean, I've never really met teachers that are phoning it in at,
Hmm.
at all. I think I agree with you very deeply that the reputation the public knows and what's actually happening in the classroom is very, very different. I'm hoping a podcast like this will shed a little bit of light to it and let people
But
know
you know,
that.
there's the controversy out there, the proposal to put cameras in the classroom. I'm a part of the minority as an educator. I believe they belong there. I believe we should open up the classroom. I think there should be access to the classroom. I think there's protections for the teacher there. I think there's protections for the student there. I, you know, I asked my students, one of the questions I asked first day of school, give me one word that describes school. A vast majority said boredom. And I applauded them. I said, excellent. When we are bored, when we are idle, if we allow our minds to think deeply, oftentimes that's when we're most creative. That's when we're most reflective. That's when we can start to think about things in a different way. Um, the problem is too oftentimes when we're bored, we quickly distract ourselves with some 30-second video that's going to entertain me for a moment, take my mind off of those things. And those are the things I'm trying to weed out. I don't want them to have those distractions. I want them to have those times of idleness and introspective thought. I think there's a great value there, and there's a lot that can take place.
Yeah, this is a great point. I mean, you and I grew up during a time when there was no internet, and when we were done with what we needed to do, we had to figure out what to do. And you couldn't call a friend because their phone wasn't with them. So what did we do? We ran down the street and went over to Miller Park,
Mm-hmm.
and there was always something going on there. If you weren't part of a pickup game, and one of the areas that you were trying to work with was full, you'd find a bottle cap and a stick, and somehow a baseball game would become that. I do believe that through the act of boredom comes that necessity for. I'm super happy when my kids. Well, my girls have never said that they're bored because I believe very much in range. I'm not sure. Let me explain that concept to you. And I want to get your insight on it, but I tend to think that for kids, it's very good to explore a wide variety of things and not just try to become a prodigy at something. When baseball season was done, you had to learn to play soccer. When soccer wasn't happening, you had a football game. And I was a tennis player, as you know, growing up. And when tennis season was over, I didn't say, "Well, I'm just going to keep playing tennis." I went out and found a good basketball game or did something. And that range gives you the ability to I think, learn intuitively in different domains.
Hmm.
And that's where school doesn't do a good enough job of giving a broad range of interests that can be taught, that do have value. For example, the arts, not just literature, but I'm a music teacher. I mean, music doesn't happen until very late in the style. What do you think about the idea of encouraging range versus specialization in especially high school age kids?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it is. We are in danger of that burnout of a child when we push them in one direction constantly. I was a head football coach up until 2013, and I resigned that position for various reasons. But I found a conflict in my philosophy and in how I was dealing with the kids, because as a football coach, you go from preseason to in season to off season to summer training to and it just keeps going. The other thing I found with the sport, and don't get me wrong, I love the sport, but I don't know if it's in our best interest of all of our high school kids to be involved in it, is it is so adult led. It is so micromanaged by the adults involved that the students have very little decision making to make. We'll tell you what to eat, what time to wake up, what to wear, where to be, how to practice. Everything is there. And I contrast that, watching the World Cup tomorrow morning's the final, and I've been to two different World Cups, Mark. I've been to the one in Tokyo, I've been to the one in Berlin, and what I found in the game of soccer, and by the way, I have that book recently that how soccer explains our global existence or something, but I can't wait to read that. But what I find with soccer is there's so much that is player led, that is player communicated, that is just the flow of the game. It just happens. It's not choreographed. You have your set pieces, but you don't have first down, get in this formation and run this play. Defense, by the way, if you're not aligned to it this way, then we have that whole strategy thing is it's much more fluid, and I find that in the arts. I played the cello when I was younger, and I took part in the performing arts, and there is so much value there in really having those multiple experiences and those varied experiences that allow you to appreciate the discipline, the passion, the art that's being performed. That when I see a cellist today, by the way, over the summer I saw a violinist at the Acropolis outdoor amphitheater in Greece, well-known German virtuoso, and it was just incredible to see the height of that art, practiced. Um, but our kids need to have those varied experiences, because we don't know where that passion is going to click, or that just that innate ability to do something. And so if we allow them to dabble here and dabble there and experience it, particularly at the elementary age and the middle school age, but at no time should a child be you know, rigidly restricted to, you're a ballerina and that's what you do. You're a water polo player and we're doing it year round. We're going to be travel team. We're doing, that's more of an adult perspective. That's not the child's perspective. That's not necessarily the child's desire.
This is
Selfishly,
an ex-
I think selfishly in a lot of ways, it's that adult behind the child saying, you're going to save me money or make me money one day. And that's not what it's all about.
yeah, definitely the parent coach, the parent involvement in the emotional investment of the child's future is difficult to reconcile. I think you make another really great point, and maybe you can break that down a little bit more for me, which is you talk about student-led activities, and you talk about adult-led activities. What's a really good example of a student-led activity where you see your idea of improvisation, your idea of exploration playing out?
Well, I think in a typical ELA classroom, one of the things we have to do as educators is slow down, present the text to the students, and give them an opportunity amongst themselves to talk about the impact of that text. Now, I try to provide them the tools. We look for various figurative language, we look at word choice, we look at tone, we look at mood. We have all these different ways of looking at a piece of literature. But I think that articulation and the opportunity to bounce ideas off of a cohort is invaluable. And so what I need to do is I need to teach them the framework or the questions to ask perhaps of your classmate, but value that input from your classmates. I think they find clarity when they're talking with someone of their own age about it, and a way of looking at a theme, the way of looking at a particular element of plot that I can't tell them. I can present it to them, but it never I don't think it's actually embraced until they have an opportunity to interact with that content themselves. So I'm a huge fan of that gradual release process where, I'm doing it, we're doing it, now you're doing it, and I am just there for feedback.
What's good adult modeling? I mean, in the real world, that's kind of the way things are. Is no one person is constantly telling you what to do. You're interchanging these ideas. I like that it's Socratic. I mean, you're describing virtually a seminar where I'll tell you a story about my daughter Annabella. She's 17, and over the summer she won an award to go to St. John's University, which is out in Annapolis.
Mhm.
It was originally, I think, King William's University. It's the oldest school alive, and everything that they do is based on classic books, and everything they do is based on seminar. In fact, their professors are called tutors. And she went for a week long, basically living the life of a college student, but having these very important discussions about classical literature with. And the amazing thing I found was she wasn't the only one. There was a room of 30 kids that were extremely like-minded, which means somewhere in the world we are producing these type of students. And I don't know what the formula is. Is it a combination of great family life like we had? Is it a combination of really rigorous academic pursuit during your times? Is it that you had a lot of friends? Did you talk around the dinner table? But I can tell you that for me, as I talked to her about, there was such diversity in lives and families. There was no real easy formula to find, but there has to be a formula. Don't you agree? There has to be some way to produce this.
I think genetics play a part in it. Honestly, I think some of us are predisposed to various academic pursuits. I don't. So I think there is some natural inclination. That being said, I think where there is desire, there is ability, and I think we oftentimes we have that untapped ability that if we ever actually tried to master a particular skill or a particular discipline, I think we could do those things. I think through our own strength. Um, so yeah, the formula. I'm always interested when I talk to kids. I want to know. Tell me about your parents. Tell me about your siblings. Tell me what life is like outside of school. Tell me what your dreams are. Tell me what you've struggled with. And so I think there's so many variables that go into it that you know somewhere ages and ages hence I shall be telling this with a sigh. Two roads diverged through a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And I think that's where we want to get our kids to.
Do you use poetry in your
Oh,
classroom?
absolutely.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
mean
Huge proponent.
that's the beautiful thing, isn't
I
it?
mean, yeah, that's word art. That is and there's no license, there's no we try to put structure to it, we try to label it, we try to put it in its category. But I think I think it's what speaks to us. It's what makes connections with our soul. I read at this stage of life. I love the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorites.
so
I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling along the floors of silent
and
seas.
just the sounds and the combination of sounds speak to us, right? And so yeah, there's something. I always approach those pieces as, what can I tell you about this? I mean, just experience it. Just try to, let's see if we can. It's like looking at a masterpiece and trying to discern its flaws or weaknesses. Why not look at it holistically and enjoy it? Allow it to feed our soul.
Yeah, you are a true professor of literature. I mean, when you able to draw that,
Mark,
and
let me start. Here's one of my new initiatives. You talk about professor. I think the title of teacher needs to be honorific. I think we need to start addressing teachers as teacher. Teacher Disney, teacher Sodavia. That to me, now you think about Japan, the Japanese, how they approach a sensei. They're honored, they're revered, they're respected. I think teaching needs that same sort of emphasis. And I don't think we're going to get there until we adopt the title. And because language tells starts to indicate the importance of that position when you are addressed that way. And when we think about all the other professions that have titles that teachers have made possible, why would we not use that title for a teacher? Why wouldn't we embrace that?
I love that. I mean, this is absolutely, you're speaking truth now. That the it goes hand in hand with the changing of mindset generally of the story of what it is to become a teacher. I mean, you have to tell a better story of what it is to become a teacher and give the excellence of it its due. We've heard the bad side of the story. We're kind of stuck now in a political debate about what's going to happen with the teachers or what's happening with education. But it really should be a cultural one. It should be one exactly what you're talking about,
Right.
an honorific. Um, so much formality has been lost in generally just how we address each other. And, we used to put on uniforms when we went out in public. And what I mean by that is good manners, the ability to listen, you know, bring up topics that are not controversial, not incite a riot. All these things were things that we had that somehow have been lost along the way. I want to talk to you real quickly. In junior high school, I had a wonderful teacher, Mr. Tui, and he had a class called rock poetry, and it was basically where we dissected the lyrics to
Mm.
at that time. At that time, folk songs really. A lot of Bob Dylan, a lot of you know Fleetwood Mac was around at that time. Whoever, and it
Mm-hmm.
was a way to get us interested in poetry. And I
Mm.
wonder if the fact that hip hop and so much of that culture uh, brought along some of the teachers that are now teaching. The young teachers in their 30s and so on. They grew up on hip hop culture.
Mm.
Um, do you ever use that as a vehicle, or do you stick to more classic type
No,
of
yeah,
poems?
first thing I would tell you is I play music when my students enter the room every day. I play music when they exit the room. So they have that background. They have that welcoming, and they have that departure music that is part of the norm. I've done units on song lyrics. I love doing it. You won't be surprised at this. I did 2 weeks of U2 lyrics because I find that what Bono has written to be so rich and to be so uh, pertaining to our world today. The God I believe in isn't short of cash, Mister. You know that sort of thing.
Right.
That really grabs me, and I'm hoping. There was a song from one of their later albums, Yahweh. and you talk about strength there. Um, so yeah, I try to I clearly try to draw with some of the more popular things today that I cannot really relate to all the time. Although I did go to a Sublime concert the other day and I had a blast. But some of the newer music is just not my thing. And I'm unapologetic. I tell the kids about that. I can't relate to some of the things they listen to, but I can also remember having a spirited debate in a language and lit class about the validity of Post Malone's art. Is he commercial or is he artistic? And it was a healthy conversation. I can remember Childish Gambino came out with his song about America, and the strength of those lyrics and the accompanying graphics that went with it was really unsettling and really thought provoking. So music has a place in my classroom. Music is honored in my classroom, and music is a source of inspiration and an opportunity for us to think.
This is lovely. This is absolutely a necessary part of that the rite of passage that kids go through. You have your own music. You have the soundtrack of your life. I
Sure.
mean, it's a cliche for a reason, and it's true. And you're right. It is a way in, but it's also a way to help them discover something that might have been passed over in their lives.
Mm.
A lot of kids, the classics are passed over. U2 is passed over. And even Childish Gambino at this point might be a
Mm.
little bit too old for something that 5 years ago meant something.
Well, one of the
I
questions, I told you about the question about how do you describe school in one word?
Mhm.
Another question on that opening question, a student survey, as I call it, was if you could have lunch with one person in throughout history, who would it be and why? Just sit down and talk with someone. And, invariably I get Taylor Swift. I get Tyler the Creator. I get, someone topical, which, okay, I appreciate that. That's your gig. That's what you want to go after. Good. But then I also get the ones who say Martin Luther King or, Socrates, and so it gives me a perspective on that child without question.
Yeah, I mean, it says something to that communication says something. Who would you like to have lunch with?
Um, Well, I think my first choice would be Jesus because I want the truth. I really want to know what's going on here. But I have a top five. I'd love to talk with Nelson Mandela. I think his story is amazing. Certainly, Martin Luther King would be up in there. Abraham Lincoln, what he went through, I would love to really figure out all those sort of things. And then I think selfishly, John F. Kennedy. I think John F. Kennedy is so intriguing to me. The life he led and the tragic end. There's so much power, so much charisma, so much, just honestly, I think there's some people on the world stage now that remind me of him that don't have the chance he had because of our media scrutiny. And I wish we could simplify that process a bit.
Hey, those are great choices. That says something about the type of person that you are. Definitely, this has been the this has been a great conversation. I would love to do this again with you. Are you up for that?
Absolutely. And I really want to get into the literacy piece because I find that so important. And I really believe that, you talked about the letter impact. Letters are so important. And then how we combine those letters to make sounds, and then how we use those sounds to come together to form words. And the ability to take our passive vocabulary into an active vocabulary and the prosody and the fluency of the language is really something that I'm studying now. I believe in structured literacy. I believe in the freedom of literacy, but I also believe there's you really need to systematically and explicitly teach our kids those tools so they can apply them themselves.
How did you get into that? Let's take a moment. How did you get into the structured literacy?
Um, Honestly, I had a student 10 years ago or so, a dyslexic student, that I really cared. I really wanted to reach that student, and I was given so many roadblocks, so many challenges through the bureaucracy of public education. Fill out this form, send this child here, this counselor would deal with it. And I wanted to deal with the child. So it caused me to step back and say, what can I do? First of all, what is dyslexia? How does it work? And then what can I do better to meet the needs of that particular student? And what I've learned is almost 20% of our students have some level of dyslexia. And so reading, decoding text is not as easy as we make it sound. And there are roadblocks, and our brains make these connections between the letters and those words we know, and they create graphics our brain creates a graphic of that word, and that's how we become much more fluent in our reading. But if we don't have those connections, what do we do? How do we approach that? And dyslexia has its challenges, but it also has its strengths as well. But those students are much more verbal. Those students are much more thoughtful in some of their responses. So we have to marry those two and find that balance where they can have equal footing and have equal access to all of the text we're dealing with in an ELA classroom. And so technology has certainly helped that in terms of audiobooks and some of these writing programs that allow us to work online. I'm a big believer of a pen and paper enhanced learning, but I also recognize those students that need that computer assistant aid as well. And I want them to have that because it helps to fill that gap. So, you get back to that path. There's not that one learning style that's going to fit all. I can't make that fit. I don't want to make that fit. I want to find the fit for that student.
That's a noble pursuit, and not just that, but in an earlier podcast, I spoke with Jamie York. He's a math missionary, does a great job with teaching mathematics, and he talks a little bit about math trauma and how that affects learning going forward. But what you've just described is a little bit of a population. There's a student population that have that same type of trauma, but it's attached to maybe reading aloud, maybe reading silently. It's attached to literature, and there has to be an advocate for them to help break that so that they can move into not just their own strengths through adjustment, but by actually being able to overcome it through a technical learning.
Mm-hmm.
It's a technical type of learning. So
Right.
I think I understand what you're talking about, applying technique to something.
Right. And I think, when getting through the pandemic, I think one of the great something we don't talk about from the pandemic is so many students learned how they learn because we were trying to do this thing remotely, and they realized that they needed more than that. And they needed that physical connection. They needed that proximity. They needed that constant uh, monitoring and compliance and feedback to be able to be successful step by step. Now, conversely, we found a population of students that gravitated towards virtual learning, and they embraced it and they prefer it. And I say, right on, let's take these things. I think the other thing that came out of the pandemic from my personal perspective is when we were all masked, we became more reliant on the spoken word. We couldn't rely on facial expressions. We became more reliant on proper pronunciation and clarity of speech because of the muffled sounds that were coming from those masks. So in some ways, we teach the sounds of letters and morphemes by watching the mouth, how we move the mouth. By taking that away, it really increases our other senses to really have that thorough communication. So in some ways, we might want to go back to that from time to time and say, let's cover our mouths and face and see if we can determine the tone, the intonations, the pronunciation of one's speech.
Yeah, this is a great point that listening is an activity. You have to learn how to listen.
Mm.
And obviously you really develop that in early childhood through music education. That's part of what we're bringing with our foundation to teaching young kids how to actively listen, and that it does help performance and upper grades as you go on, because you're able to, discern sounds from another, and also you're being taught to pay attention. I think the other point you're making is, if I don't have lip reading, I can't let my eyes wander. There's a distraction that might happen. Suddenly everyone needed to communicate on a little bit deeper, a little bit harder. And you make a good point for the spoken language.
Well, literacy, when our focus on literacy is reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And I make it a point in my classroom not to talk about don't do this, don't do that, but do this. Be an active listener. If you need to take notes to stay engaged, let's take notes. If you need to doodle to stay engaged, let's doodle. If you need to stand up to stay engaged, let's stand up. But let's find that medium that allows us to be an active listener, because listening is a skill. And so often we're simply listening to determine what our response is going to be. We're not processing that information, or we spend so much time thinking about the appearance of the source of that information that we're not dealing with what the content of that information is. And so we have to somewhat separate ourselves.
No, you that's great, because I'll take it one step further. People are actively thinking about what they're going to say. It's not very thoughtful. It's said, and now we're stuck in a situation where you have to defend that thought. And I think defending your thought that you just thought of a few minutes to the end because you said it and now identify with it is an obstacle to discussion. And you have to allow, you got to let a lot of these ideas, the first thing that comes out of your mouth isn't the most important thing. In fact, the first thing you listen to and take that breath and engage thoughtfully and mindfully with that, and then you talk about it. I mean, you can probably give a little more merit to that and hold on to that and defend that a little bit stronger. But I wonder how much you're also teaching debate when you're teaching in your class. Are you doing that at all? Do you talk a little bit about that?
Debate is a great tool in a language classroom, because debate allows us to clearly identify the pros and the cons, and allows us to, we think almost as a propagandist would think about in a debate setting. One of my favorite things to do is to choose a topic, separate the class pros and cons, and then require them to argue the opposite side, to see it from the opposite perspective. I think there's so much growth that takes place there, and that civil discourse is so important, and the voice of the opposition is important. We need to listen. We need to understand it. I took a cybersecurity course over the summer just for fun, and it taught me about kind of the perspective of the adversary, and how their approach to cybersecurity is very different from those who are trying to secure our information and our communication. And so I think taking that position that persona becomes very healthy for us in a controlled setting. And we need to be able to accept that opposing view civilly.
Absolutely. That's very, very difficult today. So much of what a person believes and is being said, and I'm talking about adults now, not kids, because it's pushed down as it's being modeled. There's an awful lot of people that hold on very tightly to an idea, and that ideology then becomes something that is dangerous to them, because it no longer allows them to see what the other side is saying, what another side is saying. I've always taught, and I always believe, that both sides of the argument need to be equally understood, and that the only way you can understand it is to be able to speak it and defend it from the other side. steelman that argument and somehow really, uh, I'm not sure that that is something that a generation of adults are capable of doing. But I see it more and more in this new generation of children, these high school kids. I see them being more tolerant of opposing ideas. I see them being more tolerant of something that makes them uncomfortable. Just understanding that, hey, just because you're uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It's something you get to work through on your own.
Mark,
This is a very
I'm hopeful for that new generation. Uh, I think there's a lot of talented, thoughtful, caring teenagers out there, and I think we just need to nurture them to the point where they can take the reins of this thing and take it in the right direction. I think that mob mentality is very dangerous, and when we all simply are uh, combining forces simply on this emotional whim because it's easier, because we're not comfortable perhaps with who we are or who are our value as an individual, I think those things become very dangerous. And yeah, I've been in situations where that mob is about to explode, and it's an unpredictable and it's a precarious situation to be in. And so we need to deal with our children as individuals and empower them as individuals.
well, you're doing an absolute stellar job at that right now. It's unbelievable to me that more and more that you don't motivate and inspire more and more generation of these kids that you're teaching to become teachers themselves, especially the boys, because you're doing it in such a thoughtful and beautiful way that I can't imagine not following you in those footsteps. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I always ask my guests whenever possible to return because I love this discussion. I believe that we can have another equally meaningful one and not replicate what we've discussed today. But is there anything you want to leave me with? Is there any teaser you want to leave me with? Thoughts for the next one?
You know, I'm very optimistic for our future. I believe in humankind. I believe in the overall goodness of humankind, and I think we need to stop living in fear. I think each of us need to stop thinking about what changes need to be happening in the world and how we can change as individuals. And I think that ultimately will bring about change. I think we need to walk in our neighborhoods. We need to say hello to people we don't know. We need to be courteous. We need to be kind to people, and and think about the greater good.
I like the world that you create for us. I'm optimistic about the future as well. Hey, listen, hang on a second. I'm going to stop the recording, but I really want to chat with you for a bit when we're done. And I want to say it has been a pleasure to speak with you. Take care of yourself.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, I stopped it there. That was great.